Got some breaking news. You know, AT&T is having its annual meeting virtually, and I did want to share news that we did just get from Randall Stephenson, of course, the company's chairman and CEO. He will be stepping down as the CEO of AT&T on July 1st to be taken over in that role by John Stankey, of course, the man who is currently number 2 at AT&T, overseeing Warner Media. But John Stankey will become the CEO of AT&T on the 1st of July. Stephenson saying he's retiring after serving, of course, his 13 years as the company's chairman and CEO. He will remain as the executive chairman of the board of directors until January of next year, 2021. And again, the company's president and chief operating officer, John Stankey, will become the CEO effective July 1st and also a member of the board of directors. Now, not unexpected in many ways. Stephenson was expected to step down during the course of this year. Obviously, nobody knew that we would be in the midst of the crisis that we are right now. One question had been whether Stankey would be deemed to be the gentleman or lady to take over for him, but of course the board has decided to move in that direction. Don't forget, Elliott Management, despite percentage-wise quite small overall percentage ownership, has had an influential role at the company to some extent. And I do have a statement from their partner, Jesse Cohn, saying that they support John Stankey as the company's next CEO. They say they've been engaged with the company throughout the search process, that it was a robust one. Again, this is Elliott speaking here, including a range of highly qualified outside candidates overseen by independent directors, and they look forward to working with Mr. Stankey as he begins his term as CEO. Stephenson, of course, changing AT&T dramatically over the course of the 13 years that he has overseen the company, with significant acquisitions, the likes of which we know well, DirecTV, which has certainly not been the best of deals given the decline in subscribers there. And, of course, topped by the acquisition of Time Warner, which took quite some time to get done given the opposition of the federal government to it, the trial that they had to go through to actually get that deal done, which cost them valuable time. But moving away from the wireless business to a certain extent as the core business at the company, Mr. Stephenson's strategy sort of focused on that. Now will be John Stankey's company to run. Carl and Sarah did want to get that out there. I don't believe the release is out yet, but they had this virtual annual meeting, and Mr. Stephenson did share the news during the course of the meeting itself with everybody who was following along virtually.
Obviously a huge deal. The stock's been sort of jumpy, but holding on to its gains. It was up a little more than 1%. I mean, as you mentioned, David, he remade this company. It looks very different than when Stephenson took over. What do we know about Mr. Stankey, his background, and his ascent to take over this sort of media conglomerate now?
Well, listen, he's a long-time telecom executive. Of course, he did get a great deal of attention when he took over the Warner Media assets. You may recall he and I sat down the last time for an interview. When was that? In the fall, I guess, right? When I went out to L.A., when they introduced HBO Max, which soon will be available. Roughly a month from now, I believe, or less, they will actually be introducing the service to a public that is certainly looking for any opportunity to consume things at home, Sarah. But he's been running that. There have been a lot of questions in terms of his leadership style, I think it's fair to say. But he's a no-nonsense guy. And he was always seen as the potential heir apparent, though, frankly, I have to tell you that when Elliott came in and started making some noise to a certain extent, there was an expectation, perhaps, that it would mean a more difficult ascension for Mr. Stankey. You heard the statement that I just read that I received from Elliott, so they are obviously supportive. And we'll see. This is an unusual time, to say the least, of course, to take the reins of one of the country's major companies at this point. We just spoke to Hans Vestberg from Verizon, talking about the wireless industry. Wireless is the least of the concerns, though, at AT&T, frankly. It has much more been on the continued erosion of the sub base at DirecTV And think about Warner Media right now, facing, of course, the problems that a lot of media companies do, a lack of advertising, a lack of sports on some of their key networks. HBO, however, perhaps a powerhouse, but HBO Max, that introduction, that's going to be a key for this company, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, the coronavirus crisis, I know the company, David, recently came out with earnings, detailed a little more about how they're being affected, committed to the dividend. But it's an interesting time to take over a company like this where not only does he have to navigate through the crisis, and I know this doesn't come into play for a number of months, but also a potentially changed landscape for business and for media and just the way consumers behave.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. Now, you know, there's benefits to it, of course. Well, you know, in terms of the need for as much robust broadband as you can possibly get into the home and 5G wireless to the extent that that is going to be able to replace it in some fashion. Consuming as much content as we all are, given we're stuck at home at this point. At the same time, there are continued questions about, of course, the satellite, direct broadcast satellite business, what they're going to do with it, whether there is potentially value somehow that can be created there in some fashion, despite the fact that it does still generate a decent amount of cash flow. And then the wireless business. You know, we again, coming back to Hans Vestberg, who we just spoke to at Verizon, how many people are going to be unable to pay their bill for the short term? How long is that going to go on for? How is that going to impair the company? AT&T has a very large debt load, Sarah, which you know well. And that has certainly been a key question also for the company in terms of how it manages that and how it's able to continue to pay its dividend and focus on CapEx and everything else that it needs to. It has continued to say it is just fine financially, but that has always been at least sort of an overriding question to some extent. But this does at least clear up any questions about leadership at the company. Again, Mr. Stephenson, the longtime CEO who will remain on as executive chairman until January of 2021.